Finding an apartment in San Francisco is not a process. It is a blood sport. For a month, I had been fighting in the trenches of Zillow, Craigslist, and a dozen other rental apps, battling it out with an army of other desperate tech transplants, for the privilege of paying a king's ransom for a glorified closet with a view of a brick wall. I was on the verge of giving up, of resigning myself to a soul-crushing commute from some distant, fog-choked suburb when I found it. The unicorn, the needle in the real estate haystack. A rent-controlled one-bedroom apartment in a beautiful classic Art Deco building in Hayes Valley. It had hardwood floors, a big bay window that flooded the space with that unique pearlescent San Francisco light, and a view that looked out over the neighborhood's charming tree-lined streets. It was perfect. And after a grueling application process that involved my credit score, my last 3 pay stubs, and what felt like a blood sample, it was mine. On the day I moved in, I met the building manager, Mr. Carlson. He was a man in his 40s with a breezy, confident charm and a smile that seemed a little too wide to be entirely genuine. He had the air of a minor local celebrity, the kind of guy who knew everyone's name in business. Jenna Martinez. "Welcome to the Hamilton," he'd boomed, shaking my hand with a little too much enthusiasm as I struggled with a box of kitchen supplies. "Let me get that for you. You just let me know if you need anything at all. Anything. The plumbing here can be a little historic, if you know what I mean. I'm your guy." He helped me with a few of the heavier boxes, all the while keeping up a running commentary on the neighborhood's best coffee shop, the hidden gem of a Thai restaurant, the dry cleaner to avoid. He seemed incredibly helpful, a godsend for someone new to the city. The only slightly odd moment was when he handed me the keys. "Now I'll have a master key, of course," he'd said with a wink. "For emergencies only." But I like to think of myself as more than just a manager. I'm a problem solver. You call my office, you'll just get a machine. You text my personal cell, he'd tap the number he'd just written on a business card, and you get me. 24/7, I had thought. It was a kind gesture at the time, a sign of a dedicated hands-on manager. Looking back on it now, I realize it was the first subtle drawing of a boundary that he had every intention of violating. The first few weeks were a honeymoon. I was in love with my apartment, with my new life. Spent my days as a web developer at a bustling tech startup downtown, and my evenings and weekends exploring my vibrant, beautiful new city. I bought a ridiculously expensive fiddle-leaf fig tree and put it in the bay window. I hung prints from local artists on the walls. I found the perfect vintage armchair at a thrift shop in the Mission. I was nesting. I was building a home. A sanctuary. A quiet, orderly fortress against the chaos of the outside world. Mr. Carlson was a constant, friendly presence. He'd be there in the lobby when I got my mail, always ready with a cheerful, "Hey there, Jenna. How's the new job?" He'd ask about my weekend plans, offering unsolicited but seemingly helpful advice. He was a little nosy, a little too familiar, but I chalked it up to the friendly, community-oriented nature of the building. I was so giddy, so relieved to have found such a perfect place, that I was willing to overlook the faint, almost imperceptible scent of a red flag. The first real test of my carefully constructed reality came a month after I moved in. My sister, who lived in Seattle, was getting married. I was flying up for a long weekend, from Friday to Monday. As I was leaving the building on Friday morning, my carry-on suitcase in tow, I ran into Mr. Carlson by the elevator, off on an adventure. "Jenna," he asked, his eyes lingering for a moment on my suitcase. Just for the weekend, I said with a smile. My sister's wedding in Seattle. Seattle! Beautiful city, he said. Well, you have a wonderful, safe trip. Don't you worry about a thing here. I'll keep an eye on your place for you. Again, it seemed like a kind, neighborly thing to say, a comforting thought. It was only later that the words would replay in my mind with a sinister, creepy echo. I'll keep an eye on your place for you. The wedding was beautiful. I returned late on Monday night, exhausted, happy, and ready to be home. I walked down the quiet, familiar hallway to my apartment for B and let myself in. The apartment was dark and silent. I dropped my suitcase by the door, kicked off my shoes, and turned on the lights. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. Tidy. My fortress, secure and untouched. I took a deep, contented breath, the familiar, clean scent of my own. Space a welcome comfort. But then I noticed it. A faint, unfamiliar smell. Lurking underneath the usual scent of my lavender cleaning spray and my fiddle-leaf fig, it was a sweet, smoky, and distinctly masculine smell. Cigar smoke? I frowned, my brow furrowing. That was strange. I walked through the small apartment, sniffing the air like a bloodhound. The smell was strongest near the sliding glass door that led to my small balcony. Had one of my neighbors been smoking outside? Maybe the smell could have drifted in. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. But the smell was gone, replaced by the usual city scents of fog and car exhaust. I went back inside, small, nagging feeling of unease beginning to sprout in my mind. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was tired from my trip. My senses were playing tricks on me. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, and that's when I saw it. The thing that I could not explain away. The thing that told me, in no uncertain terms, that I was not crazy and that my sanctuary had been breached, sitting in the stainless steel drying rack beside my sink. Nestled between my own familiar coffee mug and a cereal bowl was a single, heavy-bottomed crystal glass. The kind of expensive, old-fashioned glass a person would use to drink a fine bourbon or a scotch. And it was not mine. I stared at it. I had never seen it before in my life. My own glassware was a mismatched, inexpensive collection from IKEA. This glass was different. It was heavy, elegant, a statement piece. It was the kind of glass Mr. Carlson, with his flashy watch and his overly confident smile, would own. My mind began to race, desperately trying to find a logical, non-terrifying explanation. Had a friend with expensive taste come over and brought their own glass? No. Had it been a housewarming gift I had forgotten about? I went to my living room and mentally cataloged every gift I had received. Potted orchid, a bottle of wine, a set of dish towels. No bourbon glasses. I stood there in the quiet of my kitchen, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The cigar smell, glass, story was beginning to form, a story that made my skin crawl. The story of someone being in my apartment while I was away, someone who had access, someone with a key. I'll keep an eye on your place for you. But that was insane. It was paranoid. I was a single woman new to a big city. I was probably just being hyper-vigilant, seeing intruders in every shadow. There had to be a rational explanation. I had to have just forgotten. It was so much easier, so much more comforting to believe that I was losing my mind than to believe that my home had been violated. So I made a choice. I chose the comfortable lie. I picked up this strange, heavy glass. I washed it, dried it, and then I buried it in the back of my kitchen cabinet, behind the pots and pans I never used. A conscious act of denial. I would forget I had ever seen it. I went to bed that night, but I didn't sleep well. I lay there in the dark, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a city I was just getting to know. And for the first time, my beautiful, perfect unicorn of an apartment did not feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage. And I had the distinct, chilling feeling that I was not the only one with a key to the theater. For the next 2 weeks, I lived with a ghost. The memory of the bourbon glass, the one I had banished to the dark recesses of my kitchen cabinet, refused to stay buried. It haunted me. It made me a stranger in my own home. I started performing small neurotic rituals. I would place a single, nearly invisible strand of my long, dark hair over my bedroom door before I left for work, my heart pounding a little faster when I returned in the evening to find it broken. I would arrange the decorative pillows on my couch in a precise, almost architectural way, taking a picture with my phone in the morning so I could compare it when I got home. I was turning into one of those paranoid characters from a black and white Hitchcock film. A woman slowly being driven mad by the subtle gaslighting of her own environment. I knew, on a rational level, that I was being absurd. I was a web developer, a person who lived in a world of logic and code. There was always a logical explanation. The hair on the door was probably broken by a draft from the hallway. The pillow was probably shifted by the vibrations of the cable car rumbling down the street. I told myself this was just the normal anxiety of a young woman living alone for the first time in a new big city. I was just adjusting. I was just being paranoid. But the cold, unsettling feeling of being watched, of my space being subtly, secretly invaded, never went away. The small, inexplicable anomalies continued. I came home one evening to find the toilet seat up. I lived alone. I had not left it up. I stood in the doorway of my bathroom for a full minute, my mind racing through a Rolodex of possibilities. Did the building maintenance come in for a scheduled check? No, there was no notice. Did I leave it up this morning in a rush? Unlikely. It was a small thing, a ridiculous thing to get worked up about, but it was another data point that didn't fit. Another line of code that returned an error. A few days later, I was trying to connect my phone to my Bluetooth sound system to play some music while I cooked. As I opened the pairing menu, I saw the list of previously connected devices: Jenna's MacBook Pro, Jenna's iPhone, and a new one, Carlson's iPhone. I stared at the name, my blood turning to ice. There it was. A piece of hard digital evidence. My helpful, charming building manager, Mr. Carlson, had, at some point, connected his personal phone to my private sound system. The logical part of my brain, the part that was so desperate to feel safe, tried to find an explanation. Maybe he had been helping a new tenant in a nearby apartment with their Wi-Fi, and my speaker had accidentally shown up as a connectable device. It was a weak, flimsy theory, but it was all I had. I quickly deleted his phone from the device list. Another act of willful denial, of pushing the monster back into the closet. But it was getting harder and harder to ignore the scratching sounds from behind the door. The confirmation, the moment the monster kicked the closet door off its hinges and revealed itself in all its ugly, entitled glory, came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a miserable, foggy San Francisco day. I had been fighting a brutal migraine all morning at work, the fluorescent lights of the office feeling like daggers in my eyes. Around 2 o'clock, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my boss I was taking a sick day and headed home, my head pounding, craving the cool, dark quiet of my apartment. As I walked down the long, carpeted hallway to my apartment, for B, I heard it. A low, thumping bass line, music, and voices. A man's loud, booming laugh. It was coming from the end of the hall. It was coming from behind my door. I stopped, my key halfway to the lock. The blood in my veins went cold. Every paranoid neurotic. Fear I had been trying to suppress for the past month roared to life, a chorus of screaming, vindicated validation. I was not crazy. I was not paranoid. There were people in my apartment. My first instinct was to run, to call the police. But I was paralyzed by a sudden white-hot wave of pure, unadulterated rage. This was my home, my fortress. And it had been breached. I was not going to run. My hands were shaking, but I managed to slide my key into the lock. I turned it as slowly, as silently as I possibly could. The latch clicked open with a sound that felt as loud as a gunshot in the suddenly silent hallway. The music had stopped. I pushed the door open. The scene that greeted me was one of domestic, bro-centric bliss. Mr. Carlson and two of his equally sleazy-looking friends were lounging in my living room as if they owned the place. Carlson had his feet in their ridiculous, expensive-looking loafers propped up on my beautiful, vintage coffee table. An empty bag of tortilla chips was on the floor. And one of his friends was standing in front of my open refrigerator, a bottle of my favorite craft beer in his hand. They were treating my carefully curated sanctuary like their own personal man cave. They saw me. The laughter died in their throats. Their eyes went wide with the comical oh shit horror of teenagers caught throwing a party by their parents. There was a frantic, clumsy scramble. The friend by the fridge slammed it shut. Carlson whipped his feet off my coffee table. The other friend frantically tried to turn off my sound system, which was still glowing with the evidence of his phone's Bluetooth connection. For a moment, we all just stood there in a state of stunned, tableau-like silence. And then Mr. Carlson, the master of slimy, unearned confidence, tried to lie. He actually tried to lie, even now, caught red-handed in a situation where there was no plausible explanation. He stood up, smoothing down his polo shirt, his face breaking into that familiar, two-eyed, deeply insincere smile. "Jenna," he boomed, his voice a pathetic attempt at cheerful surprise. "You're home early! What a coincidence!" I just stared at him, my expression a mask of cold, quiet fury. "We were just, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room, searching for a life raft in an ocean of his own guilt. "We were just investigating a report of a leaky faucet in your kitchen sink. A real gusher. And we thought we'd test the water pressure and the acoustics for the echo." The acoustics! The lie was so pathetic, so transparently, comically absurd, that it was 1,000 times more insulting than the crime itself. He didn't just think he could use my home. He thought I was stupid enough to believe this ridiculous, nonsensical story. He wasn't just a creep. He was a fool. I looked at him, at his two dumbfounded beer-holding friends. I looked at the chip. Crumbs on my beautiful Persian rug. I looked at the half-empty bottles of my beer on the counter, and I felt no fear. The terror, the paranoia, the self-doubt that had been my constant companions for a month, all of it was gone, burned away by the clean, pure, and wonderfully clarifying fire of my rage. I was not the scared, neurotic girl he thought I was. I was the owner of this apartment. I was the one who paid the bills. And he was just a glorified janitor who had made a very, very big mistake. I looked at his two friends, who were now desperately trying to merge with the wallpaper. "I think you should both leave," I said, my voice quiet but with an edge of cold. Hard steel I didn't know I possessed. They didn't need to be told twice. They practically ran for the door, muttering apologies. Leaving their leader to face the music alone now was just me and Mr. Carlson. He was still trying to hold on to his pathetic, smiling mask, but it was cracking under the pressure of my silent, unwavering glare. "Now, Jenna, let's not overreact." "He started. Get out," I said. The two words were not a request. They were a command. His smile finally vanished. He saw the look in my eyes. He saw that the game was over. He gave me one last hateful, resentful glare, and then he turned and walked out of my apartment, closing the door behind him. I stood there for a long moment in the sudden, deafening silence of my now defiled home. The violation was no longer a suspicion. It was a confirmed fact. I walked over to the sliding glass door and locked the chain. I went to the front door and slid the deadbolt into place. But I knew it wasn't enough. He still had a key. The time for rationalization, for self-doubt, for quiet, neurotic observation was over. The time for cold, methodical, and decisive action had begun. The rage I felt after Carlson scurried out of my apartment was not a hot, screaming thing. It was a cold, quiet, and deeply focused fury. It was the anger of a web developer who has just discovered a malicious, deeply embedded bug in her own life's code. The kind of bug that doesn't just crash the system, but corrupts the very integrity of the data. My home was corrupted. My sense of safety was a 404 error, and I knew with the absolute certainty of a programmer who has just found the source of the problem that I was going to have to debug my life. And that meant setting a trap. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, the one his loafers had been propped up on, and I drank a cup of tea, my mind a worry server of calculated planning. The initial visceral desire to just pack my bags and run was quickly replaced by a more logical and far more satisfying imperative. To run would be to let him win. It would be to validate his belief that he was untouchable, that he could violate a tenant's space and face no consequences. No, I was not going to be a victim. I was going to be a prosecutor. And every good prosecutor knows that you do not go to trial without irrefutable, undeniable, and preferably video-recorded evidence. The first thing I did was reread my lease. I downloaded the PDF and read every single mind-numbing clause. My designer's eye for detail now repurposed for legal analysis. And there it was, on page 5, paragraph 3. Subsection B. Landlord or landlord's agent may enter the premises for non-emergency maintenance or showings only with a minimum of 24 hours prior written notice to tenant. He hadn't just violated my sense of decency. He had violated a legally binding contract. That was the foundation of my case. The next morning, I took a very long lunch break. I did not go to a trendy Hayes Valley cafe. I took the bus to a massive, impersonal big-box electronics store in a strip mall in Daly City. I was a woman on a mission. I found the home security aisle and I went shopping. I didn't want obvious blinking red light security cameras. I wanted stealth. I bought 2 of the highest-rated nanny cams on the market. They were marvels of miniature espionage, tiny high-definition cameras hidden in fully functional USB phone chargers. They were discreet, They were motion activated, and they would upload their footage directly to a secure, encrypted cloud server that I could access from my phone anywhere in the world. I paid in cash. I was leaving no paper trail. That evening, I set up my sting operation. The first charger cam went into an outlet in the living room, tucked behind my fiddle-leaf fig tree. Its tiny lens had a perfect wide-angle view of the couch, the coffee table, and the sliding glass door to the balcony. The second one I plugged into a socket in the kitchen, its lens peeking out between my toaster and my coffee maker, with a clear shot of the refrigerator and the front door. I tested the live feed on my phone. The picture was crystal clear. The trap was set. Now all I needed was the bait, and as if on cue, the universe provided. An email had arrived in my work inbox that afternoon. It was a company-wide announcement for a mandatory all-hands developer conference. In San Diego, in 3 days, it was perfect. A planned, verifiable, and extended absence. For the next 3 days, I played the part of the meek, intimidated tenant. When I saw Mr. Carlson in the hallway, I would avert my eyes and scurry past him. A performance of a young woman thoroughly cowed by his authority. He, in turn, treated me with a smug, knowing condescension. He thought he had one. He thought he had put me back in my place. He had no idea I was patiently, quietly, and with a great deal of personal satisfaction letting him build his own gallows. On Friday morning, I left for the conference. I walked past him in the lobby, my carry-on, suitcase in tow, just as I had a month before. "Off again, Jenna?" he asked, a greasy, familiar smile on his face. "Just for a work conference," I said, my voice quiet and timid. "In San Diego, I'll be back on Monday." I was feeding him the intelligence, letting him know the coast was clear. "Well, you have a safe flight," he said, his eyes glinting with an unsaid thought. "Don't you worry about a thing. The building is in good hands." "I'm counting on it," I thought to myself as I walked out the door. The conference was a blur of tech talks and networking events that I had absolutely no ability to focus on. I spent the entire weekend glued to my phone, not listening to lectures on JavaScript, but waiting for a notification from my own private surveillance network. Saturday passed with nothing. I felt a flicker of disappointment. Had I miscalculated? Was the one brazen incident enough for him? The notification came on Sunday afternoon at 2:17 p.m. Right in the middle of a keynote address on the future of AI, my phone buzzed in my pocket with a silent, thrilling vibration. I opened the app. Motion detected living room. My heart hammered against my ribs. I ducked out of the massive conference hall and into the relative quiet of the lobby. I found a secluded corner, my hand shaking as I tapped on the live feed, and there it was. My living room. And there he was, Mr. Carlson. He was walking through my apartment with the casual, arrogant entitlement of a king surveying his domain. He was not alone. He had 2 of his friends with him, the same 2 idiots from the other day. I pressed the screen record button on my phone. I was not going to miss a second of this. What I watched for the next hour and a half was a slow, methodical, and deeply infuriating violation of my entire life. They started in the kitchen. I watched as one of his friends opened my refrigerator, took out one of my expensive craft IPAs, and opened it. They rummaged through my cabinets, finding the bourbon glass I had so carefully hidden. Mr. Carlson poured himself a generous measure of my whiskey, the good stuff I had been saving for a special occasion. Then they moved to the living room. I watched, my blood boiling, as they settled onto my couch, turned on my television with my remote, and started flipping through my streaming services. I saw one of them pick up a framed photo of me and my sister from the end table, look at it, and make a crude remark to his friends, followed by a round of leering laughter. But the main event, the part that sealed his fate, was the party round. 3 o'clock, 2 more people arrived, a man and a woman. Carlson let them in like he was the host of a sophisticated afternoon soiree. They were all laughing, drinking my beer, using my glasses. At one point, I watched in horror as Carlson, trying to impress the woman, gestured grandly towards my view. "Best apartment in the building," I heard his voice say, tinny and distant through my phone's speaker. "I keep it for special occasions. For my friends, I keep it." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of those words. He wasn't just using my apartment. He was claiming it. I recorded it all. I recorded them spilling a drink on my new rug. I recorded one of them lighting a cigarette on my balcony. A clear violation of the building's no smoking policy, and then carelessly tapping the ashes into one of my potted plants. I recorded Mr. Carlson, my helpful, charming building manager, regaling his friends with a story about a tenant on the second floor, sharing her private, personal information as if it were entertaining gossip. I had it all. Over an hour of clear, time-stamped, high-definition video evidence. It was a complete and total portrait of his corruption, his entitlement, and his profound, unforgivable disrespect. The conference, my job, the entire city of San Diego, all of it faded away. My world was now the small, glowing screen in my hand. I was no longer a victim. I was a documentary filmmaker, and I had just captured my masterpiece. The bait had been taken. The trap had been sprung. And I had everything I needed to bring my own personal and very satisfying brand of justice down upon him. I flew back from San Diego on Monday morning, my mind a calm, cold sea of calculated rage. The man sitting next to me on the plane tried to make small talk, but I could barely register his words. I was too busy rehearsing the next 24 hours and my head storyboarding the sequence of events with the same meticulous detail I would use to design a new website. The user journey for Mr. Carlson was about to involve a significant and deeply unpleasant user experience overhaul. And I was the developer who was about to push the update live. I took a taxi from SFO directly to my apartment. I walked down the hallway of the Hamilton, my carry-on suitcase rolling behind me, and I felt no fear. I felt no anxiety. I felt only the quiet, thrilling focus of a predator that knows it has its prey cornered. I put my key in the lock, the old compromised lock that I would soon be sending to a smelter. I stepped inside. The apartment was a disaster. Not a loud, trashed, rock-and-roll party kind of disaster. It was a subtle, grimy, deeply disrespectful disaster. The air was thick with the ghost of stale beer and the lingering acrid smell of his cheap cigars. The living room, my beautiful sunlit sanctuary, was littered with small, greasy insults. A sticky ring of condensation had been left on my new, mid-century modern coffee table. Crushed tortilla chip crumbs were ground into the fibers of my favorite rug. One of my decorative couch cushions had a dark, ugly splash of what looked like red wine. It was the small personal violations that truly stoked my fury. The picture frame on my bookshelf, a photo of me and my sister laughing on a beach vacation, was lying face down. I picked it up. The glass was cracked. One of his oafish friends had probably knocked it over and just left it there. A small, symbolic act of their complete and utter disregard for my life. Before I cleaned a single thing. Before I allowed myself. To feel the full, overwhelming wave of violation, I went to work. I took out my phone and I began to document the crime scene. I switched to video, narrating in a calm, clear, and steady voice. Oh, man. As if I were a detective on a true crime show. Date is Monday, August 11th. Time is 2:15 p.m. I said to the camera, I have just returned to my apartment, Unit 4B, after a 3-day documented work conference in San Diego. I panned the camera slowly across the living room, zooming in on the sticky rings, the chip crumbs, the wine stain. I walked to the balcony, my voice a cold, factual monotone. I am a non-smoker, and the building has a strict no-smoking policy. On my windowsill, I have found a cigarette burn, and my potted basil plant has been used as an ashtray. I filmed everything. The unwashed bourbon glass, which was back in my sink. The half-dozen unfamiliar beer bottles in my recycling bin. The cracked picture frame. I created a 10-minute high-definition, unedited record of the desecration of my home. It was Exhibit A. My next act was to reclaim my territory. I did not call the building's preferred non-emergency locksmith. I Googled 24/7's emergency locksmith San Francisco. I chose the one with the highest call-out fee, a man named Dmitri. A burly Russian with hands like dinner plates arrived less than 30 minutes later. He took one look at my existing lock and scoffed. This is toy, he said, his accent thick. A child with a credit card could open this. You want real lock? I give you real lock. I want a real lock, I confirmed. The best one you have. And a new deadbolt and a chain. For the next hour, my apartment was filled with the loud, righteous, and deeply satisfying sounds of my security being rebuilt. The whine of Dimitri's powered drill as he bored out the old, useless lock. The sharp, metallic rasp of a file. The solid, definitive thunk of a new high-security deadbolt sliding into a newly reinforced doorframe. It was the sound of my fortress being refortified. It was the sound of Mr. Carlson's master key becoming a useless piece of metal. When Dimitri was finished, he presented me with a set of 3 new, complex-looking keys. Medico, he said with a proud grin, this lock is not a toy. No one is getting through this door unless you let them. It's good, yes. It's perfect, Dimitri, I said, a genuine smile on my face for the first time all day. The bill was, as expected, astronomical. The emergency call-out fee, the late model Medico deadbolt, the labor. It was a beautiful, painful, and glorious sum. I paid it on the spot with my credit card and made sure to get a detailed, itemized receipt. It was Exhibit B, with a door now secure, a beautiful, unbreachable wall of steel and wood between me and my predator. I could finally perform the final act of my immediate revenge. I sat down at my laptop, the one Carlson's friends had. Probably used to look up sports scores, and I opened up the design software I used for my work. I created a new file. I designed the most professional, most intimidating, the most corporate-looking invoice I could imagine. I used the official font from the Sterling Property Group's own corporate branding, a detail I knew he would recognize. At the top, in a clean, bold header, I wrote, "Invoice for services rendered and damages incurred." I itemized every single charge with a cold, detached precision of an accountant. To Mr. R. Carlson, building manager, the Hamilton Apartments, from Jenna Martinez, tenant, unit for itemized charges. 1. Emergency. After hours locksmith services. C. Attached receipt A. 585 * for necessary security remediation following repeated Unauthorized entries and breach of lease agreement clause 5. Paragraph 3B, closing parenthesis dot asterisk 2. Professional cleaning services, quote, attached. See Exhibit B, 350 asterisk for remediation of food stains, beverage spills, smoke residue, and general filth resulting from unauthorized use of premises. Asterisk 3. Property damage reimbursement C. Attached photos Exhibit C. $125. Asterisk replacement of 1 broken picture frame. $50.00 professional cleaning of 1 wine-stained couch cushion. $75 asterisk for unauthorized usage and security breach fee. $1,500 asterisk A. Fee assessed for the willful and repeated violation of the lease agreement, creating an unsafe living environment and necessitating the above-listed remediation efforts. Asterisk total amount due $2,560. Payment is due within 48 hours. I printed the invoice on a heavy, high-quality cardstock. I attached a copy of the locksmith's receipt and a few of the most damning, beautifully composed, full-color photos of the damage. I placed everything in a crisp, brown, legal-sized envelope. Then, Koa walked out of my newly secured apartment and down the hall to his. Unit 1A, the manager's apartment, right by the main entrance. I took a piece of heavy-duty packing tape from my pocket. And I taped the envelope firmly, squarely, and perfectly in the center of his door. I went back to my apartment, slid my new, beautiful deadbolt into place, and attached the chain. I was safe. I was secure. And I had just delivered my own personal and perfectly documented declaration of war. I sat down on my couch in the quiet of my reclaimed fortress, and I waited for the inevitable, furious pounding to begin. I sat on my couch in the gathering dusk, the invoice taped to Mr. Carlson's door, a ticking time bomb just down the hall. I had done my part. I had gathered the evidence, fortified my position, and launched a direct, targeted, and entirely justifiable counterattack. Now, all I had to do was wait for the inevitable explosion. I didn't have to wait long. The pounding on my door began at 6:17 p.m. It was not a polite knock. It was a furious, percussive assault, the sound of a large, meaty fist hammering against solid wood. It was the sound of a man whose petty kingdom had just been challenged, and who was not accustomed to insubordination. Jenna. His voice roared through the door, distorted with rage. "Open this door right now! What the hell is this supposed to be?" He was rattling the doorknob, a useless, impotent gesture against Dmitri, the locksmith's handiwork. I did not move. From the couch, I just sat there, my heart beating a calm, steady rhythm, a strange, serene smile on my face. The new Medico deadbolt, a beautiful, shining monument to my newfound security, held firm. "You can't change the locks, you stupid girl," he shouted, his voice now a desperate, cracking bellow that was probably echoing through the entire 4th floor? That's a direct violation of your lease agreement. That's destruction of property. I am evicting you. Do you hear me? You are out. His threats, which a week ago would have sent me into a spiral of terror, were now just noise, pathetic, predictable noise. I stood up and walked calmly to the door, my footsteps silent on the rug. I did not raise my voice. I spoke clearly and calmly, my mouth close to the wood, a quiet, disembodied voice of judgment. "Actually, Mr. Carlson," I said, my tone as polite and as sterile as a legal document, "if you'll review the lease. Clause 7, paragraph 4C. You'll find that a tenant has the right to rekey the premises if they have a reasonable belief that their security has been compromised by the landlord. Sagent, I believe my security has been compromised repeatedly. There was a brief, sputtering silence from the other side. He was not prepared for me to have read the fine print. Furthermore, I continued, my voice unwavering, my lease guarantees me, and I quote, the right to quiet enjoyment of the premises, a right you have repeatedly violated. It also requires you, as the landlord's agent, to provide me with a minimum of 24 hours written notice before any non-emergency entry. I have received no such notices ever. I was checking a leaky faucet. He screamed, falling back on his pathetic, flimsy lie. That's interesting, I said, my voice still a cool, calm river of logic. Because I have over an hour of high-definition, time-stamped video evidence from a concealed camera that shows you and your friends. We're not, in fact, checking a leaky faucet. It shows you were drinking my beer, using my sound system, and hosting a party in my home while I was in San Diego. The footage of you telling your friends that you keep this apartment for special occasions is particularly damning. The silence that followed was total. It was a silence so profound, so absolute, that I could almost hear the frantic, panicked worry of the gears in his head. The hunter had become the hunted. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been completely, seismically, and irrevocably inverted. I had him, and he knew it. And just so we're clear, I added, delivering the final, killing blow. I have already sent a copy of the complete, unedited video file, along with a formal, detailed complaint outlining your illegal entry, your harassment, and your violation of a dozen different clauses in the Sterling Property Group's own lease. Agreement to your corporate headquarters. I believe a woman named Susan in their legal department is particularly interested in the part where you were smoking on my balcony. I'd imagine you'll be hearing from them very, very shortly. I leaned my head against the cool, solid wood. Of the door, any further communication from you, I finished, should be directed to my lawyer. Good night, Mr. Carlson. I heard a strange, choked, gurgling sound from the hallway. Then the sound of retreating footsteps. The pounding was over. The yelling was over. The silence that remained was the sound of my complete and total victory. The call came the next morning at 9:15 a.m. It was from a woman with a sharp, professional New York accent who introduced herself as Eleanor Vance, the Senior Vice President of Residential Properties for the Sterling Property Group. Ms. Martinez. She began, her voice a mixture of corporate efficiency and profound, genuine horror. I am calling regarding the formal complaint you filed yesterday. I have seen the video. And on behalf of the Sterling Property Group, I would like to offer you our most sincere and deepest apologies. What you have experienced is not just a breach of policy. It is a gross, unforgivable violation of trust and security. It is, frankly, the biggest nightmare of any property owner. I listened, saying nothing. I want to assure you that we have taken immediate and decisive action, she continued. Mr. Carlson's employment with the Sterling Property Group was terminated, effective immediately at 8 o'clock this morning. An eviction notice for his on-site apartment is being served as we speak. He will be off the premises by the end of the day. Thank you, I said, the words feeling small but heavy with the weight of my vindication. No, thank you, she countered, her voice firm. You brought a serious criminal and civil liability to our attention. To that end, please disregard the invoice you sent to Mr. Carlson. The Sterling Group will, of course, be covering the full cost of the locksmith, the professional cleaning, and the replacement of your damaged property. We will also, as a further and more tangible apology for the distress this has caused you, be waiving your rent for the next 2 months. I was stunned. That's very generous. Thank you. It's the least we can do, she said. We pride ourselves on providing a safe and secure living environment for our tenants. We have clearly failed you in this instance. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me personally if there is anything else at all that you need. We ended the call. I sat on my couch, the morning sun streaming in through the bay window. He was gone, fired, evicted. My rent was waived. I had not just won. I had been rewarded. My calculated risk had paid off more than I could have ever imagined. A week later, a new building manager was hired. A quiet, professional woman in her 50s named Mrs. Gable, who, when I introduced myself, shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "Ms. Martinez, I have been fully briefed on your situation. I want to assure you that your privacy and security are my utmost priority. You will never have to worry about that again." And I believed her. My apartment, my beautiful sunlit sanctuary, finally felt like it was truly mine again. Locks were new, the air was clean, the ghosts had been exorcised. I sat on my couch one evening, a glass of wine in my hand, my own music playing softly on my sound system. I looked at my new, solid, and wonderfully secure front door. My revenge was complete. But it wasn't the sight of Carlson's downfall that brought me the most satisfaction. It was the simple, profound, and deeply peaceful feeling of being safe. In my own home. It was the knowledge that I had been tested, that my home had been invaded, and that I had not run. I had stood my ground, I had used my mind, and I had fought back. And I had won. I had reclaimed my space. I had reclaimed my peace. And I had learned that a locked door is a powerful thing, especially when you are the only one with the key. The 2 months of free rent passed in a state of quiet, blissful normalcy. The Hamilton, under the new management of the firm but wonderfully matronly Mrs. Gable, began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. The locks on my door, which had once been a symbol of my defiance, now just felt like locks. My paranoia faded, replaced by the simple, profound comfort of feeling safe in my own space. My revenge was complete. The ghost of Mr. Carlson had been exorcised. I thought that was the end of the story. But I was beginning to learn that when you throw a large, corrupt stone out of a quiet pond, the ripples have a way of touching every. Sure, it started with a knock on my door about a month after Carlson was fired. It was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment below me. She was holding a small, freshly baked apple pie. "For you, dear," she said. Her voice a little shaky. "I just wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" I asked, confused. She looked down the empty hallway, as if still afraid Carlson might be lurking there. "For what you did?" she whispered. "That man. He wasn't right. He used to let himself into my apartment, always with an excuse about checking the pipes or the wiring. He never did anything inappropriate, but his presence, the way he would look around, it made my skin crawl. I was too afraid to say anything. Lived here for 30 years. I didn't want to make waves." She looked up at me, her eyes full of a fierce, grateful pride. "You made a wave, dear. You made a tsunami. And you made this building safe again for all of us. This is the best pie I've ever baked." Her story was the first of many. Over. The next few months, I became the building's reluctant hero. A young couple on the third floor told me how Carlson had used his master key to let their dog walker in once, then had made a series of deeply uncomfortable, leering comments too. The young woman, a man on the fifth floor, told me Carlson had lost several of his packages, only for him to see Carlson's friend wearing the same distinctive brand of jacket a week later. My private war, I came to realize, had been a public one all along. I had just been the only one with the evidence and the will to fight it. My actions hadn't just reclaimed my own apartment. They had liberated the entire building. This new sense of community, of shared victory, was a warm and welcome feeling. But our peace was short-lived. A new threat emerged, not a slimy manager in a polo shirt, but something far more powerful and impersonal, a corporate memo. It was slipped under all of our doors, a single, sterile sheet of paper from the Sterling Property Group's head office. In New York, the memo announced a series of capital improvement renovations. They were planning to replace all the windows, modernize the lobby, and add a rooftop garden. To fund this, the memo cheerfully explained a building-wide one-time rent increase of 30% would be implemented at the end of the year. 30%. In a city as expensive as San Francisco, that wasn't a rent increase. It was an eviction notice. I could afford it thanks to my job. But I knew with a sickening certainty that Mrs. Henderson on her fixed income could not. The young family on the third floor, the one with a new baby, they could not. It was a classic ruthless gentrification move, a way to force out the long-term rent-controlled tenants to make way for a newer, wealthier clientele. The corporation that had saved me from my monster was now becoming a new kind of monster itself. The building was thrown into a state of quiet panic. A few desperate flyers were posted in the laundry room. People would have hushed worried conversations in the lobby, but no one knew what to do. They were just a collection of individuals, powerless against a giant, faceless corporation an entire country away. And then they started knocking on my door. Jenna, my neighbor from across the hall, said, his face etched with worry, "You're the one who dealt with corporate? You have a contact there. You have to help us. You're the only one who knows how to fight these people." I was hesitant. My war was over. I had my security, my peace. I had no desire to become the leader of a tenants' rebellion. I just wanted to live my quiet life. But then I thought of Mrs. Henderson, of her apple pie, of her 30 years in this building. I thought of Carlson and the corrosive nature of unchecked power, and I realized my work was not done. My revenge on one man was meaningless if I allowed a whole building full of my neighbors to be victimized by another. So I said yes, my living room, the space I had fought so hard to reclaim as my own, became the headquarters for the newly formed Hamilton Tenants Association. My skills as a web developer and my methodical, evidence-based approach to problem solving were repurposed. I built a simple website to disseminate information and organize our efforts. I spent my nights not watching for intruders, but poring over San Francisco's labyrinthine tenant rights laws. Then I made my move. I didn't write a letter of protest. I drafted a professional, data-driven counterproposal. I calculated the actual cost of the proposed renovations versus the projected income from the rent hike, proving it was not about improvement, but about pure profit. I proposed a more modest, phased renovation plan that could be funded by a smaller, legally allowable rent increase, and I didn't send it to some faceless legal department. I sent it directly to Eleanor Vance, the senior VP who had helped me. My email was respectful but firm. Subject: a proposal regarding the Hamilton dear Ms. Vance. You helped me once to ensure my home was safe. I am writing to you now on behalf of my entire building to ask for your help in ensuring our homes remain affordable. Please find attached a counter-proposal regarding the planned renovations. We are not your adversaries. We are your partners in making this building a wonderful place to live. We believe there is a solution that benefits both the Sterling Group and its long-term loyal tenants. I look forward to discussing it with you. It was a bold move, but I was no longer afraid of making waves. A week later, I got a call. Well, Eleanor. She had read my proposal. She was impressed. We scheduled a Zoom meeting between her and a small committee from our tenants association. The meeting was a success. We, a small group of ordinary people, a teacher, a retired postman, a young family, and a web developer, calmly and respectfully presented our case to a group of high-powered corporate executives. And because we were organized, because we had the data, because we were reasonable, they listened. They agreed to our phased renovation plan. They agreed to a modest legal rent increase. We had one. The community was safe. That evening, we had a small celebration in the building's courtyard. Mrs. Henderson brought another apple pie. My neighbors, my friends, they clapped me on the back. They called me their hero. I looked around at the happy, relieved faces of the people I had, just a few months ago, barely known. I had come to San Francisco looking for a home, a quiet, private sanctuary for one. But my battle against a single, slimy man had forced me out of my shell and into the lives of others. My revenge had, against all odds, given me a community. I realized then that the ultimate victory wasn't changing the locks on my own door. It was helping to build a place where everyone felt secure enough to leave their doors open. And that was a home far bigger and far more beautiful than any I could have ever imagined for myself.